Good evening and welcome to our April 21st Douglas County Board of County Commissioners business meeting. We want to welcome any of you who are at the Douglas County Courthouse or joining us online. I just want to pass on a bit of information regarding how we will run our meetings on Zoom during this time of social distancing. If visual aids are used during the meeting, the presenter will share the screen with the call. Participants will not be able to view them without a computer, smartphone, or tablet. All participants will be entered into the meeting with their audio muted, meaning the commission and the public will not be able to hear you. Presenters will be unmuted when their agenda item comes up. We ask that all online presenters use good conference call etiquette and mute their line when not speaking and introduce themselves each time they speak. If you have public comment on an agenda item or under regular public comment, please use the raise your hand function on Zoom. Staff will call on you and unmute you. We ask that speakers give their name and address for the minutes. Please keep public comments under 3 minutes. The county reserves the right to shut off the microphone and remove any speaker from the meeting if they use vulgar, rude, or inappropriate language. The chat function has been disabled and a recording of this meeting will be available on our website after the meeting. So let's start with proclamations. Sarah, do we have, looks like Jasmine Moore is here. Jasmine, would you like to give us any background on this proclamation before we read it off?
I sure will. So Jasmine Moore, Sustainability Director, joined by Ezekiel Moore as well. So I wanted to just give a little bit of context for Earth Day this year. And first, I'd just like to start off by talking about sustainability and what that means. Sustainability, we like to say, is living today like you really believe there's going to be a tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day after that, and for generations to come. And so we know that if we plan to be here tomorrow, the way that we treat our Earth has a lot to do with what that future will look like. So we are excited to celebrate Earth Day this year, even though it's going to look a little bit different than how we usually celebrate Earth Day. We aren't going to be able to celebrate in person with a big event. And we do have some ways that people in Douglas County can still celebrate at their homes or outside even. And so we invite folks to visit our website or our Facebook page to check out some of those options. And then I also wanted to elevate the issue that climate change and environmental injustice are also really closely linked with systemic racism. And we know that Black, Indigenous, and people of color bear the worst impacts of environmental harm. And so we are also encouraging everyone who thinks of themselves as an environmentalist to also consider how racial equity can inform your actions related to Earth Day and all things environmental related. So like I said, we have some ideas about how ways people can celebrate, and we are using the hashtag DGKS Earth Day if you want to share what you are doing to celebrate Earth Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine. So whereas in this unprecedented time of a pandemic and economic upheaval, as we keep close to our hearts and minds the deep pain and suffering of those who are ill or have lost loved ones, the sacrifices of all healthcare, public service, food and grocery service, educator, and other essential workers, and the devotion of individuals and families taking care of each other, we pause and also recognize the caring tradition of Earth Day. As the first Earth Day occurred over 50 years ago, when millions of Americans took to the streets, college campuses, and hundreds of cities to protest environmental ignorance and demand a new way forward for our planet. And in the years since, Douglas County government, organizations, businesses, and residents have celebrated and echoed this appreciation and call to action. And whereas we are all stewards and beneficiaries of the earth and its healthy and diverse ecosystem is vital to a thriving community, a vigorous local economy, and a sustainable environment. And whereas the accelerating climate crisis requires action by all communities to reduce greenhouse emissions, to protect our planet for future generations and adapt to climate threats. And whereas we must use creativity, innovation, and education to solve these challenges with local communities leading the way by embedding equity, encouraging sustainable energy and water use, sustainable land use and transportation, and waste reduction. And Earth Day offers people an opportunity to make, renew, and celebrate commitments that will protect quality of life and the earth for generations to come. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County, Kansas hereby proclaim April 22nd, 2021 as Earth Day in Douglas County. Any comments from fellow commissioners?
I just want to appreciate all the work that's been done by the Sustainability Office, and appreciate that we are still given an opportunity to acknowledge this and think of some creative ways. And I thought it was a really thoughtfully worded proclamation also. So thanks, Jasmine, and nice to meet you, Ezekiel.
Well, I just say it's great to see Ezekiel on there, who will benefit from our thoughtful approaches to sustainability. So thanks for bringing him on and introducing him. I'm not sure for the first time, but maybe reintroducing him to county government and local government. And Jasmine, thanks just for all your work on this.
My pleasure. And you got to start him early. So he was at public meetings as a baby. So this is old hat for him.
Thank you so much. We will move to our consent agenda. Would commissioners like to pull anything from the consent agenda?
No.
Sarah, do we have anyone in the courthouse who would like to pull an item from the consent agenda?
We do not.
Jill, do we have anyone online who'd like to pull an item from the consent agenda?
No.
Okay. Thank you. I'm looking for a motion on the consent agenda.
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All of those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We will move to general public comment. Sarah, do we have anyone in the courthouse for general public comment?
We do not. Thanks.
Thanks. Jill, do we have anyone online for general public comment?
We do. Just 1 second. Let's see, Jasmine Bates. Jasmine, go ahead.
Hi. Let's see. I'm Jasmine Bates. I live at 1417 Pennsylvania in Shannon Reed's district. And I wanted to comment today in favor of something that I think is just an informative part of the meeting, but it's regarding the Housing Stabilization Collaborative and the United Way Eudora Resource Center. I'm really, really excited about both of these community efforts, and I really hope that the county will fully support them in all the ways that they need so they can be successful. That's all I got to say. Good to see all of you.
This is Commissioner Portillo. Thank you, Jasmine. Jill, do we have any additional general public comment?
Not seen any, no.
Okay, thank you. We will move to our first regular agenda item. This was an item tabled from last week, our legislative and policy update. And I believe Stuart Little is here for that update.
Yep,
I
thank you.
am.
I'll introduce Stuart. Thanks.
I am. It's a pleasure to join you all this evening. I thank you, Sarah and Jill and commissioners, for accommodating a bit of a travel scheduling, putting me at the top of your agenda. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to give you all an update on kind of the big picture where we are in the legislative session, some of the specific issues that we've been watching, and then probably more importantly, kind of what's upcoming here in the next, when the legislature returns at full time on May 3rd. You have a written report from last week. Other than a few vetoes, there's not a lot to change on here, obviously. Where we are at this point is the legislature's taking a 2-week break. The budget committees are coming back Monday and Tuesday of next week, and we'll begin looking at the budget issues and take into account revenue estimates. I'll talk about those in a minute. And then the full legislature will come back on May 3rd to begin the wrap-up session, which historically lasts somewhere between a week and 2 weeks. I think we're probably in for a good 3 or 4 weeks at least of this upcoming session, given some of the issues that remain on the table, and I'll go through those. We started out the year with about 4 issues that were the front of at least the House and Senate legislative leadership perspective in terms of changes to the property tax lid, constitutional amendment on abortion, the Kansas Emergency Management Act changes to deal with COVID, and then the last issue was income tax issues that had been tax cut bills that had been vetoed 3 times in the past. Those were kind of on the legislative agenda. The governor had a legislative agenda, included Medicaid expansion, variety of other programs that were that she was backing. And where we are at this point in the big picture, what we had at the end of the legislative session was the budget bill was passed, the budget was sent to the governor, and it's now in front of her to make a decision on whether or not she's going to line item or veto the bill in its entirety. It is worth noting and important, and part of a contributing factor to why the veto session will be longer, is that there was none of the school finance components in the budget. So $6 billion of an $18 billion budget was not in the budget bill that was sent to the governor. That was in a separate school finance bill that had both policy and funding. That bill was vetoed, or that bill was killed in the Senate on a 2020 vote. It passed the House, failed in the Senate, and so it is dead. That bill had some non-public school policy issues in it, a couple of things, a variety of other changes related to COVID, and the entire budget failed in the Senate. So everyone's trying to do what you do when a bill fails. What do we need to do differently? And do we add more stuff to it or strip it down? That's part of what's going to have to get resolved here over the course of this break. So that is probably one of the most significant issues, because lots of things revolve around K-12 funding, and if that's unresolved, we've got some serious issues. Some question out there as well as whether the governor will veto the budget bill that's in front of her right now. I don't think that's going to happen. But a couple of issues that are going to be part of this, we're going to be dealing with that ed issue. She did veto the income tax bill that went to her, which was a combination of a variety of these corporate and business tax cuts, changes to the itemized deduction that had been tried 3 times before. The overall cost of the tax cut package was about $300 million, 285, I think, something. So it was a significant tax cut, but it wasn't comparatively, in some ways, to what was passed the Senate, for example, was $1 billion. So she vetoed that, which means that now the income tax cut bill issue is alive for the wrap-up session. And probably further complicating that is the consensus revenue estimates that just came out that projected that, based on revenue projections, we're going to have an additional somewhere about $360 million in tax revenue coming in. And so there's going to be about a $900 million ending balance this year, and one relatively the same the next year. And so there's a significant amount of money. The governor vetoed the tax bill, saying we didn't need to be returning to some of our early 2010s tax policy and making cuts. And I think the argument by some folks in House leadership, legislative leadership, is already that we've got sufficient revenue, we can make a tax cut now. That will be debatable as we go forward, and we'll have to have conversations about overriding a veto. I mentioned as well the school finance issue. So we're going to have schools, we're going to have this income tax issue back. We're going to have the school budget, kind of just as in terms of the context of, we're going to have this transgender women's sports issue that's going to likely be vetoed by the governor. That's going to come up and be a significant issue during the legislative session. And frankly, the longer they are in town, the more issues come up. So that's one of the things that we're watching out for. I want to briefly talk about some of the local government issues that we're watching. I have a lengthy description of at least 2 bills in there. One of the things that's going to make the veto session bad as well, not bad, that's the wrong term, so much more complex, is that the latest round of federal COVID relief money is going to give the state $1.8 billion. And so given where we are in the process and where we are making decisions, there's nothing like adding more confusion and complexity to the process, because folks are trying to figure out where they can spend those dollars, what those dollars can be used for. And there's a couple of bills that I describe, and I note the bills on page 2 and 3 of the written report are a couple of examples of COVID relief proposals that particularly in the Senate, they are looking at trying to pass, and neither one of these proposals have passed. But I think this is what folks were working on as we got to the end of the regular session. This will likely shape what we may have to be confronted with during the veto session, the wrap-up session. Both of them hinge around how do we provide relief to businesses and organizations and entities that were impacted by COVID, and in particular, in some ways, impacted by local government and state decisions that impacted business capacity, those kinds of issues. And so some of the things that are being kicked around are providing income tax refunds, property tax relief to people who can say that their businesses were impacted. Then that conversation turned into a conversation about using, I apologize, there's a helicopter flying over, income tax or property tax relief. Or once in the midst of that conversation, it was learned that local units and the state would be getting federal relief money to the extent that there would be able to carve out some of that state and about 25% potentially of county COVID dollars set aside for a state managed pool to compensate people who made claims of lost revenue during the pandemic. None of these things have passed. I keep in mind, but this is what I think is going to be on the table when we get back. Part of what evolved as part of that discussion as well was another bill that it was in. One bill was Senate tax, one bill was Senate judiciary. The property tax relief discussion evolved into why are we having, and this some of us may recall the conversations about for-profit health centers wanting to have tax relief because they were having to compete with government run recreation centers and those kind of things. So Genesis, the company out of Wichita, was pursuing legislation to give them a property tax relief. And part of the conversation that came up and put an amendment into one of these bills does that for any entity that is that competes with a government service. So if a governmental entity provides a service that a private entity provides, then those folks would not have to pay their property taxes. And so the issue was, for example, was health clubs, number one, but the language that was proposed is so broad as to include housing. If you have a housing authority, trash, any of those kinds of issues could get on the table. The ones that they excluded, childcare, daycare, those kinds. Talked about it for 1 year, but you can imagine putting something like this kind of, and again, this fits into how do we provide people relief for COVID. You can imagine if this took into place, how difficult it would be to pry it away a year from now. So none of these things have passed, but I think when I'm certain the people that wanted to do this at the end of the regular session are working on how to put something together and kind of stop the competing plans and come up with some organized plan. So I suspect we will have some kind of organized proposal that will be focused on property tax relief, on relief for businesses impacted by COVID, and they are very likely to try to access some of the federal COVID relief funds, both from the state and from local units of government. I'll stop there. That's a lot, and hit a couple of other highlights, but that's kind of the big picture of where we are. Some of the issues I know that are still going to be lurking out there. I'll talk about a couple of things that did pass as well, but I can pause and see if anybody has any questions. All right, I don't see anybody jumping in.
I don't have any questions, Stuart. Thank you.
Okay. At the bottom of page 3, one of the things that was passed that is of some relative importance, that kind of the follow-up bill to the tax lid repeal and the Taxpayer Transparency Act. As you all know, when that bill finally passed the legislature, one of the last things they did on the House floor was stick school districts into the transparency issue. So that two completely different budget cycles, all those kind of things don't really fit together very well. But what they ended up having to do was pass a trailer bill essentially that changed some of the dates. I think they're more administrative and procedural, and they attempted to broaden some of the timeframes and delay a little bit so cities and local governments would be able to do that. There are a number of county appraiser related bills that are packed away in there that probably aren't things that the county appraisers wildly supportive of, and that certainly happened. So that did pass. One problem with that issue is, again, this is going to bring up some complexity at the wrap-up session. You may have seen the board of the district court decision in a Johnson County with regard to appraised value at the Bass Pro Shop. And it essentially accepted what's been described as the dark store theory, that the valuation of a commercial property is based on it empty, not as it is, as if nothing was there. And that court decision may have a significant impact on folks who've wanted to try to codify some of that philosophy into BOTA decision-making. That may be another issue that's going to pop up and something that we're going to have to be prepared to deal with. The kind of the last looming on the horizon at the veto session is Senate Bill 87, which passed out of the Senate Tax Committee, sits in the general orders in the Senate. This essentially, going forward, the original bill eliminated county city sharing of sales tax revenue and said all the money goes to the county. County decides what they want to do with it. That turned into a bill that, as amended and passed out of committee, says that for any future or any renewal or new sales tax, 60 days before the public vote on that, county commission had to declare whether the county would keep 100% of that and come up with their own way to distribute it, or whether it would be distributed under the existing formula. And so I think that's may have some life to it, but it's an odd bill with an odd history. It's just too long to talk about here, but it likely may advance before we get done with this session. I know I apologize for taking so much time here. I'll just wrap up and just quickly note a couple of on page 7 and 8, a couple of criminal justice driver's license legislation we've been following. Kind of there's some updates for that. A couple of things of interest with regard to like voter registration and some of the advanced ballot issue. Just know there's folks with some interest in that. And probably last but not least, I would note that in the budget process, of note, we still are struggling to figure out how to resolve the funding for the 988 National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and what's going on there. There's a policy bill. There was some money in the budget. We've got to figure out how to invest some resources in startup, and then what to do with operational costs. And on the table right now is a 50% mobile phone tax, and neither one of those things have passed yet. So that's still hanging out. I would note that the Regent system got a $225 million state general fund, which restored the 3% budget cut. The crisis center is fully funded in the budget that was sent to the governor, funded by the lottery, and the provisions of the community centered behavioral health center for Burt Nash and the community mental health center system, that was approved, and the legislation implementing that was approved as well. So all of those things are all good things that have happened, with the exception of kind of keeping an eye on the suicide hotline. But I'd be happy to answer questions if you have any.
This is Commissioner Portillo. I don't have any questions. That was a lot of information. I really appreciated the memo and really appreciate the rundown. It does sound like this is going to be a long veto session. I will be very surprised if they wrap up in under 3 or 4 weeks. So it will be interesting to see what comes out of this. I guess the biggest part that maybe this is a question, I don't know, just around the COVID funding piece, because it did sound like there were some pieces of legislation that were starting to get started with talking about that. Do you have any more information on that piece of things?
Well, I think the issue is, if you look at what happened with the Emergency Management Act, the KEMA, the new bill, which essentially the heart of that legislation was decision-making will lay with elected officials. And so you diminish the power of public health officers, you implement this grievance proceeding, which kind of opens a door for a required, very speedy administrative hearing process and a lot of judicial kind of impact in the process. Is that the legislature's intent was to make sure that elected officials are accountable for decisions that have an impact. And I think that transfers over into how they're talking about how do we help economic recovery? How do we help folks who wanted to have relief or need relief from the last year, essentially? And all of the bills that started out talking about, we're going to literally make the county pay out of your general fund property tax relief for businesses that were closed or had limited restrictions, something like that. And I think when they discovered that the COVID money was coming and that was something that they could claim, to the extent one believes federal tax dollars are not tax dollars that we pay, it's like it's kind of a free way for us to tap into a pool of money and make some people whole. And I think that is a pretty strong impulse. I think it is on probably both sides of the aisle. I think it will be a matter of putting constraints on it. Now, I will say the Senate Tax Committee's bill limits it to businesses that if you didn't receive more than, and I'm just saying this in terms of, it's not kind of willy-nilly. You can have people just claiming, $50 million. That if you received over $150,000 in federal relief in some capacity, you're not eligible. If your income in 2019 was over $3.5 million, you're not eligible. And so they're attempting to not make it wide open, but to target at small businesses, restaurants, bars, beauty salons, whatever, those kind of things, and not necessarily for big businesses. And I think the challenge will be, I think we're going to see something like this. It's going to be a matter of what it's structured like, what it's shaped like. And the way the current proposal on the table is that 25% of the county's revenue, unencumbered dollars, would go off to this fund where the state would control it. Folks seeking a claim would go to the Department of Revenue, go through a process, and then Revenue would make a decision. So it would be a kind of a state decision to distribute this. We would simply contribute a part of those dollars, which, administratively, that's probably better than reaching into this general fund of the county and paying people back. But I think something like that is going to emerge. And I suspect folks that want to do that are working. And it is something that has some appeal to a decent wide range of folks.
Stuart, this is Sarah, and I guess I feel obligated to chime in there, particularly for those that are listening to this conversation. It's important to note that the county collects tax revenue on behalf of dozens of cities, townships, and jurisdictions inside Douglas County. So I'm curious if this is would we be responsible for getting revenue back from each of those districts or cities that received that tax distribution? It's not simply county revenues per se. Does that make sense, Stuart?
Well, the interesting issue is that, as I understand it, you are required to contribute, and this is not having the language of the proposal right in front of me here, but the original way I believe it was proposed and described was, if the governing body's decision at the county level imposed restrictions that restricted operating hours, defining essential business, restricting capacity, those kinds of things, that governing body is responsible for contributing to the fund, using some of their federal COVID money to contribute to the fund. And so if a county implemented those orders, public health orders, you are required to contribute to the fund. It raises questions about what if a city didn't do it, but just went along with it. According to at least the draft of the bill that was floated out to everybody, you had to be the entity that made the decision. Now, in some jurisdictions, I don't know what City of Lawrence did, but in some jurisdictions, municipalities implemented some of their own restrictions, and all of a sudden those kinds of things may have put them on the hook for that. Whether a jurisdiction, for example, just adopted the county ordinances, I think it's still unclear what that is. And that's a debatable issue as well. But the way the bill's written, the governing body that implemented the restrictions is responsible for contributing.
Which is really interesting in Douglas County's case, since we have an independent health board that does not have any taxing authority over either the city or the county. And the public health officer who is appointed by the health board made those distinctions up till last Wednesday in Douglas County. So I'm not sure the legislature's thought about that yet either.
Yeah, they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants the last 3 or 4 days of the session. So I think something may be more firmed up by the time we roll back into town on May 3rd.
This
This
is
is
Commissioner
Commissioner Portillo. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Reed.
I was just going to say, I don't have any other questions. Stuart, thanks for being gracious about coming back this week after last week's long meeting and making time.
No, I'm happy to. We're here when you need us.
Stuart, I don't have any questions. I don't want to hold you up from your quick helicopter ride out of there. So
This is Commissioner Portillo. I do just want to make sure that, do we take public comment on this?
It is open for public comment since it's on our regular agenda.
And do we have anyone there in the courthouse with you for public comment on this item?
I don't have anyone for public comment on that item.
Jill, do you have anyone online for public comment to this item?
No,
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Stuart. Hope you enjoy your vacation and get ready for a long PICO session when you return. And we will move to item 4.2, Douglas County Correction Facility Booking, Release, and Stepping Up Initiative data. This was also tabled from last week, so I do just want to say thank you to Sheriff Armbruster and thank you to Dr. Cravens for sticking with us and coming back this week rather than making us stay up past my bedtime last week.
Yeah, it was getting a little closer. I was falling asleep at my desk last week. Again, I'm pretty new to this, so I think I'll just kind of take it from here and turn it over to Mike Brower. Is he signed in?
Let me get him moved over. All right, thank you.
Okay.
There
Well,
we go.
yeah, just he's kind of the expert in the room when it comes to this. But so when I came on board in January, and Commissioner Reed and Commissioner Portillo, I wonder if you knew that today is our 100-day mark as having been sworn in. But it was congratulations. So Mike and the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and members of this agency were working together on several different projects, but actually giving credit where credit is due. During the campaign, District Attorney Valdez mentioned that she would like to have a dashboard that's similar to something that Hennepin County, which is Minneapolis, was doing. And so Dr. Cravens actually knew the guy in Hennepin County that had created that dashboard. So he hooked up with him, and I'm sure it was just a couple of keystrokes and Control Alt Delete and a copy and paste real quick, and we had a dashboard. But I'll for the granular and the data stuff, I'll let those two talk about it. But what we've learned and especially having a week to look at it, but also having given it a presentation last week to the CJCC, we've already found a lot of areas that we need to readdress. This is obviously a first draft, early look at what we have, and so we're just really trying to, at this point, make sure that our data shows accurately reflects what's going on. So I'm not in a position yet to make comments or opinions on what the data shows, but we're just really trying to make sure that the data is accurate, because it's only as good as the people that are putting it in, and it's only as good as the systems that are holding on to it and pushing it out. So we welcome all questions, and you'll see there's a lot of like miscellaneous or left blank or some categories that just don't make sense. And we want to encourage folks to reach out if they have those questions on what is this, or why do we come to this place? How did we get this number that's labeled this one thing? And we want to try to explain that as best we can, or at least give some examples or maybe some possible reasons why. But for the dashboard itself, I'll turn it over to Mike and Matt Cravens.
Commissioners, this is Mike Brower. Thank you for some time this evening. I'm going to let Dr. Cravens just give you a quick run through of the dashboard. And then I'll say a little bit about the Stepping Up Initiative dashboard before he shows you that one.
Great, this is Matt Cravens, and I will share my screen and show you all the dashboard. So if everyone can see this, this is the Douglas County Sheriff's Office webpage, and there's a slider in the middle that shows you different images. And if you click on through, you can get to the Stepping Up Initiative dashboard, which we've also made, and the Bookings and Offenses dashboard. And you just click on this link, and it'll take you right to the dashboard. It's also available on the CJCC hub too. So I just want to say this data is on bookings and offenses for people entering the Douglas County Correctional Facility. And a quick thanks to Bryce Hirschman and the Douglas County GIS team for getting this effort off the ground and for getting me familiar with the ArcGIS software. Bryce and the GIS team have been a great resource. And so much of this data, as I've said at the CJCC meeting, is contained on the booking recap report that's available on the Sheriff's Office webpage for individual people booked on certain days. But what's unique about this dashboard is it aggregates all the data for many years and presents tabulations and figures on it. And it'll eventually present the data for download in a clean, user-friendly format. So right now we plan to refresh the dashboard every 2 weeks. If people request it, we can eventually make it 1 week. So it's best to think of this dashboard as a tool of transparency. It shows what's in the Spillman Jail Management System, which is the Sheriff's Office data. There are no regression adjusted numbers or anything complicated really. The figures are descriptive with sort of basic tabulations and some averages with pretty minimal translation from the database to what you see here. So as Sheriff Armbruster said, one thing that's nice about this is we can change what's here and it can be expanded relatively easily. For instance, Commissioner Portillo and others have already made some suggestions for changes, and we've incorporated some of those in. We're still working on the rest of them, but we can certainly make changes relatively easily. For instance, we have some bond data that we've put in another dashboard, and we have a prototype of that, and that'll be going up at some point in the future. So I also want to note that as the Esri company that runs ArcGIS produces updates for its software, there will be changes. For instance, cell phones don't work great with this dashboard, but we predict that at some point in the future Esri rollout, there may be a more cell phone amenable version of the software. So with that, let me jump in. You can move around the columns like this if you want to make something bigger, but what's key is you can hover over the top right-hand corner of any figure to expand it or to collapse it. So I'm going to just expand the race ethnicity bookings 2020 figure. And what we see here is for 2020 bookings that 71% were for people who are white, 18% were for people who are Black, and so on. Hispanic, 6.3%. You can hover over a slice to see the actual raw number of people who were booked with that ethnicity and the percentage. So you can hover over almost anything in this dashboard and it'll show you a little more info, which is a really nice feature. One thing is that we included some notes. So for instance, over here on the top left or the bottom left, you can see a note. The Hispanic category only includes people who report the race as white. People who report being Hispanic and Black, Native American, or Asian are categorized as Black, Native American, or Asian. So it's important to read the notes. We also say use the computer for optimal viewing. You can still click on the right-hand top corner to expand something on a cell phone, but it doesn't view quite as nicely. So we recommend a computer usage for that. So that is the race ethnicity figure. Over here, we have gender, and we are changing this to men and women instead of female and male, but we see that 72% of bookings are male or for men, and 28% are for women. Over here, we have county residents. So Douglas County residents make up about 71% of bookings, and non-Douglas County residents make up about 26%, and there's about 3% who don't have a zip code. We use zip code to determine county of residence. Over here, we have 7 length of stay categories. So you can divide all people up into one of these 7 categories. And what this shows is about half of bookings stay 0 to 3 or 3 to 24 hours. From 2017 to 2021, which this figure is showing, another 3,582 bookings stayed 1 to 3 days. Then there were a smaller number who stayed 3 to 7 days or more. And there were, let's see, about 1,026 people who stayed 90 days or more. And what we did is we included for some of these figures multiple years of data. So you can just click on the tab that says 2017 to see the 2017 distribution and move through 18, 19, 20, and 21. The distribution changes a little bit during COVID. And what we can do is go up here to the average length of stay by year figure. And this presents a nice sort of summary statistic of length of stay. It's sort of a one figure, a one number demonstration of how long people stay. So the average length of stay is listed in days. And what we see here is that the average length of stay was about 16 days and increased somewhat up until 2020, and 2020 it was 21 days. We suspect that might be because COVID led there to be people, more serious people were kept in the jail and lesser serious people were not booked into the jail. So the people who were in jail were probably staying a little bit longer, but in general, we have seen an increase in length of stay over the last few years. We can also click on average length of stay by race and ethnicity. We do see a disparity here. The Black average length of stay is 30.6 days, whereas the white average length of stay is 19.1 days. For Native American and Hispanic inmates, it's also about 19 days or 18 days. For Asian people booked into the facility, it is 4.2 days, which is a lot less. And this shows the number of bookings by year. So this has declined pretty significantly in the last handful of years. We see the impact of COVID pretty seriously here in 2020. There's been a lot fewer bookings. 2021 is incomplete, obviously, because the year hasn't been finished. But in 2019, we saw about a 20% decline in bookings from the previous year. So there was a decline in 2019 as well. I'll just pause for a moment. If there's any questions, people can obviously just jump right in.
This Commissioner Reed here. I do have a couple questions. So with the length of stay, I'm trying to go to it like I can click on it and expand something. I cannot, but I'll do that later. I'm wondering if, how do I articulate this question? Is that like unique to each individual person, or like you pointed out the 90 days or more number? In theory, somebody could have multiple stints of 90 days of jail time in a given year. So I'm just curious if the way the data captures that is like based on each individual new booking, or would it recognize that perhaps one person had 3 or 2 90-day stays, for example, in a year? Does that question make sense?
Absolutely. And that's a fantastic question, and a question that I think a lot of people will want to know the answer to, because the data for that length of stay figure and for a lot of the figures that I've shown so far are on the booking level. So it's the average length of stay per booking. So over here we see in 2020 that each booking, the person stayed 21 days on average, but a person could have 2 bookings and then they would show up in that data twice. So if they were booked twice in 2020, they would actually enter into the sample twice. And one thing to note is I did show the data. So we call this the bookings and offenses dashboard, in part because what I've shown so far is all bookings level data, but what I'll be about to show you is all offense level data, and you can have multiple offenses per booking. So basically, a person can be booked in a couple times during the year, but then each booking can have multiple offenses too. And so that's why these numbers in the figures that I'm about to show you will be higher than the bookings numbers. So over here we see bookings 2020, there were 2,838, but when you go to the offenses number, you'll see more, because people have about 2 offenses on average per booking.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that. And then my other question is around the gender category, and I'm just wondering if you can help me understand more why it is. So I think I heard you say, and I'll admit that I haven't finished watching last week's CJCC. So this discussion could be repetitive if it was brought up then, but I think I heard you say that it's being changed from male and female to man, woman, and I'm just, words matter to me. So when we talk about male, female, that's biological sex, it's not gender. And if we're going to have a gender category, then there's more than 2 genders. So help me understand why it is the way it is and what the how that's dictated perhaps by the booking information that's gathered.
Yeah, so I'll just say quickly what I know and then pass the baton off to Sheriff Armbruster, who knows more about how the data are kept. But, you know, men and women, it would be how you identify yourself. And I thought that's how people were classified in the jail. I may be wrong, but that's why we wanted to change this from male to female to men and women. But you're right, if we do go by identity, then there are multiple categories. We just don't keep the data in the Spillman category or the Spillman database for more than 2 categories. But I think someone else may be able to jump in. It looks like Commissioner Portillo, you maybe, but also Sheriff Armbruster, you can jump in as well.
Well, this is Commissioner Portillo. Commissioner Reed, I was just going to say that this was a big part of the conversation in CJCC, and Dr. Cravens, I do really appreciate the update on the race, ethnicity, demographic data. I think the demographic data are things that we just need to have conversations about. So like with the race ethnicity, that's something where it's not necessarily folks self-identifying. They may be identified by officers, which can be problematic. We also know that there are a number of races within the ethnic category of Hispanic. I really appreciate the note. We don't have a ton of overlap, but we are seeing kind of some spaces where we're missing some categories. Around the gender category, we had talked at CJCC about this potentially being relabeled as biological sex or labeled as sex and keeping male female because we wanted to recognize the binary descriptors that are on the database and then include a note that says we recognize that gender has more than 2 binary categories and these categories come from bookings data. I know Sheriff Armbruster keeps better data at the jail, but that's not the database that this is pulling from. So we wanted to actually keep it the way it is, but change the label from gender and then just put a note in noting where it's coming from in the data.
Yeah, and I apologize for stating that wrong. You're right. I was going to consult whoever we discussed, and I think you're right. We were going to change gender to sex. So,
and Commissioner Reed, you bring up a perfect question because, and like I said earlier, is that we're trying to make sure that the data that we input is accurate. But I also have to explain that there's limitations to what goes into the system. So to work backwards in order to go forward, when a person is arrested and brought to the correctional facility, the state of Kansas requires us to fill out, the arresting officer to fill out a Kansas arrest report, KSA, or Kansas Standard Arrest Report. And within that report, there are drop-down boxes. And we all know how limiting drop-down boxes can be. And under, you know, it's either male or female, and under race, it just has white, black, Native American, Asian, and other, if I remember right. I mean, it's not the way it should be, but that's the way that it gets reported into the state system. So therefore, we're kind of compartmentalized as far as that goes. However, when a person comes to the jail, and this is where I'd talk about the Douglas County Jail versus the state, in that in our Spillman system, we actually do have a third category where it's male, female, or transgender, and I can talk at length about that process for people who are transgender or self-identify that way or transitioning, and all the protocols that we go through and the way we support them. But that's kind of where a lot of the numbers are driven from, is simply what's required by the officer to input into the arrest report, what we're required to put into our database that gets sent to the state for their data. But we have the way to get into our Spillman system and create some other categories and look at some other things. But and as Commissioner Portillo said, the race and ethnicity is it's very much not a drop-down box situation. And so we're trying to really work through that. But that's a great question. And that's something that the public is going to have a lot of questions about. So I really appreciate you asking that one.
Yeah. Well, thank you all thanks for being repetitive too, since I realized this conversation was had or started last week. But I think that I completely understand the limitations of data forms and the way state systems, set up. I understand, and quite frankly, just the way that correctional facilities are set up, that there's a male and female inmates, and then each jail individually decides how, if or how they will provide support and accommodations to trans and non-binary people. So I appreciate you mentioning that, Sheriff Armbruster, and I just think it's really important that we make sure that male and female is biological sex and not gender, and that I appreciate Commissioner Portia's note that we can add some language in there just as an acknowledgement that it's not that binary, and that's how data input happens.
Yep.
Thank
And
you all.
going to jail is bad enough and traumatic enough. There's no reason for language to make it that much worse for folks. So we're really trying to do what we can on our side.
With that, I will jump into the offense type figure. This is the figure on the top right-hand corner, assuming there's no more questions. If there are, just jump right in. So I'll expand this figure. There are tabs for multiple years on this one as well. The first tab displays all 2017 to 2021 data though, and I'll show that first. The most common offense by far is failure to appear. In these set of years, there were 9,157 offenses. And again, these are offenses and not bookings. So a person can have multiple offenses, and usually the average is about 2 offenses per booking. The next most common was DUI, and then drug, and then not listed elsewhere. So there's a note over here, not listed elsewhere includes offenses like murder and identity theft that do not have enough records to warrant their own categories. So we were sort of limited by space. We couldn't put every single offense. So we grouped the ones that weren't listed and not listed elsewhere. Probation violation is here. And then there is an other municipal county violation category that booking officers select. They don't know the specific offense information. So the numbers you see for other categories like DUI, for instance, could be a little higher or lower depending on how many of those particular offenses like DUIs are in this other municipal county category. But what's nice is we did have a conversation with booking officers, and since that conversation, they've been using the other category a lot less. So if we flip over to 2021, we see that there's only been 17 instances of people using the other category, and that shows a real effort by the booking officers, and we certainly appreciate that for data purposes. So other offenses here are domestic battery, remand, if the judge remands you to jail, criminal damage, theft or stolen property, interference with a law enforcement officer, other battery or assault, driving while suspended, disorderly conduct and trespass. And people can go through the rest at their leisure, obviously. But you see that the distribution of offenses does change a little bit over the years. In 2021, DUI was still second, failure to appear was still first, but in 2020, we saw that domestic battery was second and failure to appear was first.
This
So
is Director Portillo.
Yes.
I just noticed on that the scale changes significantly between years. I imagine that that's because just of sheer number of offenses, so how the data are showing up, but that may just be another place where, not that folks are probably going to go through and read the notes as closely as I hope they do, but we may just want to include a note about that scale shift, because if folks are going between years, those are just drastically different numbers between 2019 and 2021. But if you're just looking at the distribution, you may think that you're on the same scale. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does change quite a bit. That's, I think, a good idea for a note. So I can look into adding that. I'll just think about the wording a little bit.
Thank you.
So over here we have judicial status. 55% of offenses are pretrial status, 14% are pending referral to a prosecutor, and 11% are sentenced county time. About 3% are sentenced state time. Let's see, 8% are charged not filed by a prosecutor, and 6% are referred to another jurisdiction. So pretrial is the most common judicial status. Over here we have the release reason. So all data for this dashboard is taken at the point of release. So in some sense, we could almost say releases instead of bookings, but the data is collected at the point of release, so we know how long people were staying for sure. And we also know their release reason. And for 25% of people, they were released on their own recognizance. 20% were released with a cash, surety, or credit card bond. 15 to 16% were released with charge dismissed or not filed. Other is pretty large here, it's 13%. People were released after time served, 8%. Released on the judge's authority, 5%, and so on. Over here we
Commissioner Reed again.
Yeah.
What might other be on that? Can you just give me an example of what that could encompass?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like a pretty thorough list of release reasons, and 12% is not unsubstantial. So I'm just curious what that.
Yeah. Some of them are smaller categories, like released on pretrial supervision. So our pretrial supervision program will release some people, and that's recorded as a separate release reason, but it was a pretty small number. So I included them in other rather than just have an infinite number of small, tiny categories. But there are a number of people, I would say about at least half of the other category that are actually just blank, who don't have data for release reason. So that's why I wrote other/blank. So about half of them are blank, and I don't know the exact reason why they're missing data. They just actually don't have a record for release reason in that table of the database. So I can look into that a little bit more and try to give you a sense of which sort of people are having blanks, but I'd need to follow up with you on that.
Sure. That's helpful, just context to know where that category came from. Thanks.
I also want to say maybe we do have people who are serving time, and they do what they call flatten their time out, to where they're released simply with nothing, no more parole or probation. So they're just flat released. The other thing is we have a lot of folks who have to come in and serve 48-hour, 5-day commits. And when they're released from those, I don't know that, I'm not sure what code we use for that release, and because I don't think it's probation or parole.
That's what I was kind of wondering too, like municipal court orders for 48-hour or like weekend time over a period of months. So, okay, thanks.
Over here we have offense classification. So one important thing to note, and there is a note in here, is that failure to appears always are listed as misdemeanors, even if the originating offense was a felony. It's just for failure to appears, we don't know what the originating offense's felony classification is. So those are listed as misdemeanors. But when we take that into consideration, we see that the vast majority of bookings are misdemeanors. About 900 in 2020 were felonies, and about 1,200 were either unknown or NA. And again, note that people can have multiple offenses. So I think it's about 30% of people are booked in with only misdemeanors, but there are a number of people with a felony and a misdemeanor. So that's something to think about. And a lot of these unknown NAs are actually misdemeanors, but we don't know that for certain with all of them. But we've done some analysis on some of them, and there's, for instance, a number of domestic batteries that show up in the unknown category. Over here in the final figure we have is the court jurisdiction and case type. So the most common is district court criminal. If they have a criminal case in district court, there's about 2,000 of them in 2020. Other district court, other can include offenses that had not been assigned a case number by the time of release, or offenses for which charges had not been filed by the prosecutor by the time of release, or offenses someone posts bond for before first appearance. District court traffic, there's about 300 of them in 2020. And then you see all the municipal court categories here. There are fewer number of municipal court offenses, but there's still about 600 others, about 550 criminals, and about 500 traffics. And then there's about 368 out of county offenses. So that's it for the dashboard. Again, we hope to have a data download option and a bond data dashboard as well at some point, but for now that's what we have, and we hope it'll be a nice tool for transparency for everyone.
This is Commissioner Portillo. I really appreciate this, and I think this is a great tool. I love the goals for transparency. I am just hoping that you all can give us an update for the public that may be watching around how this project interacts with discussions around VERA, the VERA Institute coming in and providing a dashboard for our community.
Thank you. I actually forgot to mention that in my intro, and I appreciate that. So we, since taking office in January, we've been in conversations with Vera about coming in to do their study and producing a dashboard. And when this was released, we had a great conversation on Monday with Sarah Minion, and she basically said that this is, to quote her, she said it blew us away, and they want to redo the memorandum of understanding, or basically the contract with us, to become consultants, or to be kind of an outside peer to look in and help us look at the data, see what the data is telling us, see where the areas that are doing well or maybe need some more attention, but also can also provide us some help with some programs that we may not know of. So we're actually better off than we were last week during the CJCC, I feel, and I think Mike and Dr. Cravens will agree. But so Vera has actually pulled back their MOU, and they're rewriting it to send it to us again to reflect the changes that we're basically entering into an agreement together to work together, as opposed to them creating something for us. So it's actually quite exciting. So we're in good standing with them. We've set a hard, not a hard deadline, but we've set a pretty firm deadline for a month out to have the MOUs exchanged through our legals, and hopefully we'll have something signed up and ready to get moving here within a month. Thank you, Commissioner Portillo, for asking.
Thanks, Sheriff Officer. I am really excited, and I think that Vera can be a great kind of thought partner for us around what are some of the policy pieces, because I mean, you even mentioned it in one of these categories where we used to see bookings officers kind of leave something blank, and now we're seeing more data. I think that we may see other spaces of that just from kind of what happens when we have transparent data piece, but then also potential booking areas when it comes to, well, we have a lot of failure to appear. What kind of policies and programs can we put in place to ensure that folks are showing up or make it more accessible? Do we have transportation pieces? Do we have text reminders? How are we thinking through those pieces? So I'm excited for them to transition into that policy support rather than just doing kind of what we can do with our data and our great data analysts. So thank you for continuing to move that forward.
Oh, this is Commissioner Kelly. I have a quick question for Dr. Cravens. This is great. It's really awesome. And of course, every time we present something that's awesome, we're going to continue to challenge you to go deeper. So I'm interested if there is an opportunity. I mean, it's sort of as how you put the data in. Is there an opportunity to filter any of this data? So for example, if I wanted to look at just municipal court offenses and see average length of stay for municipal court, is there a way to do that?
You know, that's a feature I've seen on a lot of Tableau dashboards. And, you know, my first response would be, at some point we could transition this into a different software like a Tableau dashboard that has a little more of those kind of features. I'm not aware of sort of an automatic filter option with ArcGIS software, but we can add additional tabs in. So it's certainly possible for us to add, like under this sort of ALOS or average length of stay tab, to add one in for municipal court and one for district court, just to show those two separate average lengths of stays. And that's a great suggestion, and I'll write that down and, you know, see if we have space for that. But as of now, I don't know any way of sort of adding the filter other than to just add a separate figure on. So if you think of additional figures that might be helpful like that, certainly let us know and we'll try to incorporate them.
Well, and I also think it would be interesting. You mentioned Tableau, and I'm very familiar with that platform. That's what we use in the school district for all our dashboards. It may be interesting to create a partnership discussion with some of our local government agencies to see if there's some way. I mean, these are the kind of things that we could partner on, you know, and use tools. GIS is great, but you're right, we're being limited somewhat in the way GIS works. Just it's the hardware, the software that's behind it. So just a thought there.
Yeah, a lot of great opportunities for working with other folks. We'll look into that.
Commissioner Reed, I don't have any more questions, but thank you for fielding all the ones I did have. I don't have any more for right now. Can't promise that I won't later, but this looks really great, and I'm excited to use it in my work as a Willow advocate. I'm just thinking about all of the years that I daydreamed about having a volunteer look at those daily booking recaps and try and track for things like domestic violence arrests or violation of protection orders. To see some of that offense type, I just think there's some really thorough and thoughtful tabs here, and it's exciting to hear that we can add more also. If we think of other pieces of information or filters, that'd be good. So it's exciting progression, and really happy to hear about the update with Vera also.
Well, Matt, this is Mike Brower. While Matt tees up the Stepping Up Initiative data dashboard, I just want to remind some folks that a lot of the deeper data analysis on some of the data points you see here, it is done in CJCC work groups and presented to the CJCC, and we're recording those and putting those on the website. There were some questions about failure to appears, which, as you notice, is the most singular offense for all years at the jail, or jail bookings. And Judge Simpson and Matt did a really thorough analysis of failure to appears, separating out the two courts back last September, I believe. Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah.
To the CJCC. And so we're trying to figure out a way to make it easy for people to find those, so that they can, so that the dashboard doesn't have to become so detailed when information like that is available with video explaining a lot of the issues. So we're working on syncing our data a little more too on that end. On the Stepping Up initiative, I want to highlight that dashboard as well, and Matt will show you in a second. Not quite as detailed. We don't have as many data points. But as for most of you know, Douglas County joined the Stepping Up initiative back in 2015. The initiative is simply to reduce the prevalence of people with serious mental illness being booked into our jail, and the length of time that they spend in jail once they are there. Back in 2018, Douglas County was designated as an innovator county, one of 8 innovator counties nationally. There are currently 33 innovator counties, and Douglas County was just selected as one of those counties to the Set, Measure, Achieve initiative community of practice. And so we'll be working with other highly innovative counties to improve the work that you're going to see in front of you. The Set, Measure, Achieve initiative is simply that we set goals, measure our data and outcomes, and then achieve those goals. So last year, the CJCC approved recommendations from the Stepping Up Initiative work group to reduce the number of bookings of people with serious mental illness by 10% annually, to reduce the average length of stay for people with serious mental illness by 5%, to improve connections to care for people with serious mental illness. It's not a data measure we track electronically. So our goal is to do that so we can establish baseline data, and then finally to reduce recidivism for people with serious mental illness coming back into the jail by 5% annually. And so to help us track that and provide some accountability, we created this data dashboard, which Matt will show you. And I will brag a little bit on Douglas County. We wanted to be the first county to put this dashboard together. We unfortunately finished second to Columbus, Ohio, Franklin County, who beat us by a couple of months. But they're good guys. We're friends with them, so we'll let them have this one. But so thanks to Matt and all his hard work, and Sheriff Armbruster for allowing us to do work like this. So go ahead, Matt.
All right, so this is the Stepping Up Initiative dashboard, and over here I'll show you first The left-hand column has some notes and also an informative video on Douglas County and the Stepping Up initiative. So you can just click this link and hopefully Zoom will still show you this. Well, that's an ad, but it will show you that that video that will give you some more background on the initiative and the work in Douglas County. Definitions are also here on the left-hand column. SMI, serious mental illness, is defined as a diagnosable mental, behavioral, or emotional disorder of sufficient duration to cause serious functional impairment in an individual's major life activities. The assessment criteria form is linked here. DCCF is the Douglas County Correctional Facility, and here's how we define days in jail. And with that, I will just show you the first figure here on the top left-hand corner. This is serious mental illness bookings as a percent of total DCCF bookings. As you see here, it was quite high in 2014. This is sort of our baseline year. It dropped a lot in 2018 and 19 to an average of 7.2% of bookings. And it slowly crept up a little bit over 2020 and dropped down a little bit in the last quarter of this year. So January to March of 2021, we see that 11% of bookings were for people with SMI. Our target is 8.1, so we have a little bit of work to get down to that. But this shows you where we're at and if we're making progress.
This is Commissioner Portillo. Dr. Cravens, I think that that graph is also very interesting because of the scale in time, because we have 2014 as our base, but then we jump all the way to 2020. So that looks like a huge drop, but it's over the span of 6 years. So then the increase, which is over the span of just a few months, it makes it look like we're doing something really terrible in 2020. 2020 was terrible enough. I don't know that we need to add to it with kind of data presentation. Is there a way for us to either include those other years or remove 2014 and just focus on 2020? How can we adjust that scale?
That's a great suggestion. And I think, as you said that, it made me think that what we should do is just include those years in between on the x-axis and just sort of leave them blank, you know? And so you'll still have a line going from 2014 to 2018 and 19. And maybe what I can do is separate out 2018 and 19, but what we'll do then is just add 15, 2016, 2017 here. So we see that the transition was a little more gentle, so to speak.
Yeah, that would help us understand the slope of that line a little bit better.
Yeah. One problem is just it'll expand the x-axis considerably because over here we're measuring on the quarter. So we'd actually have to include 2014 quarter 1, 2, 3, 2015 quarter 1, 2, 3, 2016 quarter 1. So
is there a reason to share these data quarterly rather than annually?
You know, we just thought it would be easier for tracking progress. You know, the sample size makes it a little bit more reliable if you report by the year, but quarter is still relatively reliable. And we just thought that might be a good way of saying, hey, we are or we aren't making progress. You know, we can have some internal discussions about that. It certainly could be possible to report it by year. I mean, I don't know, Mike, if you have any thoughts about that, but it's something we can look into.
Hey, Commissioners, this is Mike Brower. We don't have data. We do have data. It's not kept electronically for 2015 and 2016. We do have 2017 data. So we could, but I'm wondering is if we split this into two graphs, one for 2014 through 2019, and then a separate graph that is annual. And then for 2020, 2021, maybe do a quarterly graph. And I did want to point on this graph too. And one of the reasons why Matt and I made the decision to make it quarterly is we wanted to show the impact of COVID-19 or the pandemic has had on the population of people with serious mental illness. It's a whole nother presentation, but there was only, even though if you remember the previous jail bookings data, that the number of bookings in jail decreased from 19 to 20 by almost 1,800. The number of bookings for people with serious mental illness only decreased by 14. And so that's why you see that number going up. So what this tells us is that this population was even more underserved or marginalized by the pandemic. And that's an important point. But that's a whole nother presentation. That's what I like about this, having these data sets, is it's going to allow us to be able to see that and tell that story.
This is Commissioner Portillo. I really appreciate that, Mike. I think just as long as we have consistency on the x-axis, we can have one or two graphs. I think either way, it's just about the presentation of the data. I think the two graphs is probably a better solution because it does get exactly what you're saying on that quarterly basis. I am really excited for that next conversation because I have so many questions around, you're right, we saw bookings decrease. These data are presented in percentage of bookings. So I wonder if part of that is that we may have had fewer folks who are being booked into jail on less serious offenses. So are we seeing folks with SMI overrepresented and more serious? Are we seeing the percentage of folks within our community having SMI diagnoses that like we're just recognizing during the pandemic? I think that there are a whole host of potential questions around that, and I look forward to that presentation.
This is Commissioner Kelly. So I'm 100%. The x-axis confuses me on this chart a lot, and a less noble interpretation is that we're trying to make it look good, right? And it's not good. And I think in that way, it has to be consistent. This is alarming data when you look at it, and it doesn't tell the story maybe that we would like it to tell about. We've been very proud, and we should be very proud of the progress we've made in reducing the number of SMI in our jail. It may be COVID, it may be other things. This may be, again, Dr. Craven's another opportunity to filter back on the other page, because you could add SMI as a filter there and you could see something. The other thing, though, I think, and I don't mean to interrupt your presentation, Mike, I feel like I'm jumping ahead, so I'm sorry about that, is I would like to have this data in context. So what do we see in other counties? And I don't know if there's a way to do that, because that's the reason we're part of the Stepping Up initiative, is that we're so, my understanding was that we are so far ahead of other counties there. And so while we should have our own goals, and our goal is to lower it, I don't want people to get things out of context of the work that we've been doing.
Great question, Commissioner. We have regular update calls with the other 33 innovator counties. And we have difficulty comparing our data for SMI with theirs because all of them are using proxies for SMI to determine their numbers, which seem to, we believe, cause a higher report of that number. So for example, our SMI is based on a diagnosis by a licensed clinician. And then that is put into the Spillman system by the clinician. Whereas other counties other innovator counties are actually using a proxy of the brief jail mental health screen, which is a self-report screening form, suicide watch, and that they're on psychotropic medications. So a 3-pronged proxy, which I'm sure Matt's mom, if she's listening, who is a licensed clinician, would shrink at that proxy for determining serious mental illness. So we really have to rely on comparing ourselves to our baseline data is the best measure we have until other counties can kind of catch up to. And that's because you have a sheriff that's paying for 4 licensed clinicians to be working in his jail every day. That's the only reason we're able to accomplish that.
And I'll just say thank you all for the comments, especially on the x-axis. The reason we just did this is these were the data points we had, and I just put them in and didn't really think about it as much as I should have. So I think having a yearly and a quarterly graph will be optimal. So we'll definitely do that. So over here on the bottom left corner, we see the SMI percent of the DCCF population, and it is about 31%. This is the average for January to March of 2021. So what we did is we assessed the population that were SMI and non-SMI once each month in those 3 years or 3 months, and then took the average. The total population over those months was about 124, and 31% of the people were people who were booked in with SMI. So the reason that 31% is so much higher than that 11% we saw in the other figure is just that they're staying a lot longer. So if they're staying a lot longer, they make up a larger percentage of the population that's standing. Over here, we have average days in DCCF for SMI bookings and all bookings. And, you know, we kind of knew that from the population figure, but they are staying longer. So people with SMI in the last quarter of 2020 were staying about 29 days on average. And then the all bookings population were staying about 11 days on average. So even though it did drop a little bit, and again, we need to work on the axis on this one as well. But even though the average days in DCCF for SMI decline a lot in 2020, it seems to be creeping up a little bit. And in each of the time periods, we see that it's higher than the average for all bookings. So that's something we can try to work on bringing down. But one thing to note is that the length of stay for the SMI bookings is high in part due to the people who wait a long time in DCCF to be sent to Larned for competency evaluations. So at some point we may try to break those people out of the figure and see what the SMI population or what the SMI average length of stay is for the people who aren't waiting to be transferred to Larned, because the high numbers of people or the high length of stay for the people going to Larned is going to sort of skew the average. So at some point in the future, we are also planning on adding a figure on recidivism as well. So what percentage of people with SMI and without SMI were booked back into the jail within a year. So that's something we plan to add on a future iteration. But that's it for now, and open to any other questions that you all might have.
This is Commissioner Portillo. I don't have additional questions. I do just want to say thank you. This is a huge amount of transparency with our jail data and stepping up data, and I really appreciate how accessible these dashboards make it for folks to see it. If there aren't additional questions from commissioners, we can open this up to public comment, but I'll give commissioners a chance first. Any questions?
No, thank you.
Sarah, do we have anyone in the courthouse for public comment?
We do not.
Jill, do we have anyone online for public comment?
No.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Sheriff Armbruster, for celebrating your 100th day in office here with us in a county commission meeting. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Dr. Cravens. Thank you, Mike, for this presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will move to item 4.3, Douglas County Housing and Resource Navigation.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jill Jolliker, Assistant County Administrator. Thank you for giving some time for myself and some of the community partners that are joining us on tonight's call to talk more about a couple of really meaningful projects that have come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. I provided each of you with a summary memo, and I'll hit some highlights of that, but then I really want to allow some time for our stakeholder agencies to talk about the work that they're doing and allow you to ask some questions about these programs and maybe have a short dialogue. I know we've had some good conversations already tonight with our other items, but I really appreciate the time to talk tonight. Douglas County's history of providing supports in the housing and resource navigation space has largely been based in, as I discussed in the cover memo, the Emergency Services Council. The county has played a role largely as a funding partner in funding supports for utility and rent assistance through the Emergency Services Council model, which has historically included the agencies of Willow Domestic Violence, Salvation Army, Senior Resource Center, Ballard Center, and ECAN. That model of the Emergency Services Council has kind of slowly gone by the wayside, and it's more of a collaborative model of community partner agencies that work together to work with other community partners like Catholic Charities, Tenants to Homeowners, Family Promise, agencies that aren't necessarily a part of the official Emergency Services Council framework that's been around for several years. But together that group has been trying to problem solve and better understand opportunities to coordinate access for clients to housing and rent assistance in a equitable, trauma-informed system that increases access to care, which, as I discussed in the cover memo, has been a long or a long-term aspiration for the Human Services Coalition group. So one of the most significant developments that came to pass coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic and has been the incredible response from our human service agencies on keeping folks housed, preventing folks from becoming homeless, and providing the necessary supports that folks need to remain housed. So as I discussed in the cover memo, the first one that we want to highlight this evening is the Housing Stabilization Collaborative. This really started out as an idea and it blossomed into what I think has been the most significant effort in our community to keep folks housed and prevent homelessness. So I want to allow some time for kind of the founding partners to talk about it, and then talk about where that program stands today with the program manager. But so first I want to pass it off to, you have Dana Ortiz with Lawrence Family Promise and Rebecca Buford with Tenants to Homeowners. And Rebecca, Dana, I'm not sure which one of you'd like to start off and offer some highlights of the work that you've done.
Well, thank you to all the commissioners and Jill and Sarah for allowing us to be here tonight. It's really a pleasure and an honor. And we couldn't be more excited about what has happened with the Housing Stabilization Collaborative. It started in 2019, actually, through a Family Promise grant we got awarded from our national office and the HUME Foundation, which is a foundation called Help Us Move In, is what their acronym stands for. And it was a community grant for us to do a 4-to-1 match for their grant. And we got private donations for this. And we were able to utilize some national best practices on preventing homelessness and helping families move back into housing after experiencing a situation of homelessness. So we had our little community grant fully funded in January of 2020. Our community match came through, it was ready. And then this crazy thing happened in March of 2020. And we started getting an enormous number of calls of folks who had suddenly lost income and didn't have options and didn't know what to do and didn't know where to turn. Many of those were folks without children. Family Promise mission is serving families that have children in their care. So I called my friend at Tenants to Homeowners and said, Rebecca, can you help out with this? Maybe we could do, and so we started brainstorming. Our team and her team, we started brainstorming and put together some forms online, applied for some grants, including Douglas County Community Foundation's Emergency COVID Relief Grant and some others, got some additional funding and started giving out rental assistance. And then all of you put this brilliant plan together for the CARES money. We applied for some of that grant money, and we were able to distribute nearly $1 million worth of rental assistance to our community, to our neighbors, to our friends in Douglas County. Rebecca, how many households? Over nearly 500, 497, I think it was. So that's kind of the introduction. Rebecca, please. I didn't mean to steal all the thunder. I just got on that roll.
No, Dana, I couldn't have said it better myself. So you really, yeah, I think 497 families, you know, which was an average of under $2,000 of rental assistance, but that kept people in their houses. Because remember, we were thinking, oh my gosh, thankfully for eviction moratoriums, but even then thinking, if we have 500 more homeless families suddenly, this is a crisis beyond all crises. And I think that's what we've learned from this, is that upstream preventative measures make a lot of sense. Now, kind of, we have hindsight of what a pandemic can look like, and moving forward, we don't want to have that feeling again. So I think moving forward, looking at how do we intersect with programs like this with someone who maybe isn't, you know, we have people that are struggle with homelessness or chronically homeless and need wraparound supportive services. But there is a large majority of people struggling with high rents in Lawrence that are just one emergency away from homelessness. And so that was really what we discovered with COVID, kind of seeing, you know, one health emergency and you're homeless. And so those are, you know, very efficient ways in which we can prevent a huge expense for the county later on by preventing homelessness. But now I think we want to not do it. Moving forward, we want to not look at just pandemic and, you know, quick kind of supports, but really try to expand those supportive services and integrate this program so that it's not just Band-Aid rental assistance, but it is, we're collaborating in an effort to make sure that people get all the supports they need so we can maintain their stability. And for some that may need a little more supports, you know, and that's what Tenants to Homeowners has been focusing on as we move into the future. Housing, supportive service housing. So we're looking at, we've added 20 units of accessible housing for people with physical disabilities, 10 units of domestic violence survivor housing. We are just now opening 3 units for those aging out of foster care. So as we continue to add these, this is where Tenants to Homeowners wants to continue to be a part of this rental assistance program and make sure we're all aware of the best kind of stable and supportive housing. So we may be able to move someone from a rental situation that isn't supportive and meeting their needs to one that is. And that's really where the navigator and the navigation of this program can be just life-changing, I think, for us, when we have all these great supportive services and all these great agencies, but we need an integrated system that looks at housing as the main stabilizing factor so that we can then, you know, like that housing first model says, we can stabilize housing, then we can provide all those other supports to really work on income increasing so that we can even more stable, you know, create financial stability. But without that stability of housing and a place to call home, that's hard to get to. So I really love the collaborative approach of HSC, that there isn't one agency doing this, that it's all of us working together.
Thank you, Dana and Rebecca. And that's a great way to lead into Gabby Sprague is here. She is the day-to-day, the engine that makes this collaborative model work today. Gabby is, her position is housed within the United Way of Douglas County. Her office is housed in the, it's technically in the Housing Authority, correct?
Yeah, in the Resident Services
Right.
Building.
Yeah. So I want Gabby to introduce herself to the commission and talk about all the wonderful things that she's doing and give a preview for just what this is going to look like in the future and the ways that the county can be supportive of that.
Yeah, and I was brought on with the United Way of Douglas County back in October, actually, doing about 15 hours of work every week, just doing direct supports with tenants, helping some of that CARES funding get out to folks. And then I was brought on full-time in March to do primarily three things. One, provide direct supports to people. Two, provide programmatic supports to doing some of that direct supportive work. And then three, provide some sort of leadership to the Housing Stabilization Collaborative, or more leadership, I would say, coming from the United Way of Douglas County. Some of the things that I've been doing is I've returned 91 phone calls regarding various housing supports since December 10th. I've helped 53 households since December 10th, ranging from, as we know, housing covers a lot of very different things. Like if a person does not have adequate money for childcare, they might not be able to pay their rent that month. So it looks a lot of different ways. But I've provided supports such as doing applications for affordable childcare, doing some tenant advocacy work, getting rental assistance out to folks, and even informing people about the CARE program, the state program for rental assistance, and how the eviction moratorium declaration affects them. In addition to all of that, I've been convening the Housing Stabilization Collaborative monthly meetings, providing some leadership for those. I would say there's about three main goals in there. One, bringing all of the social service agencies that provide direct rental and utility assistance under one sort of umbrella. That way that folks that are looking for those sorts of supports can just have one process and one place to really go to access those things. Two, what supportive services and care coordination looks like for folks, and bringing all of those organizations under one understanding and sharing best practices for providing supports for people. And then three, just community-oriented solutions to solving the systemic issue and preventing homelessness in the Douglas County community. Another thing that we're pretty invested in right now is the Unite Us referral program network. That is going to be, I think, coming to more prominence here in the Douglas County area. Another thing that I do is get together some folks to work on a rental availability list that can be shared widely throughout the community whenever people need it. Basically just a list of landlords sharing their availabilities right now, the properties that are available to rent right now, in addition to folks who will work with people for Section 8 vouchers, and people who have been convicted of a felony in the past, people who have had evictions in the past, various questions like that. And I would say, just to reiterate Rebecca's point, I think rental assistance is really a prominent need right now. I think the ripple of, I always think about the pandemic as, you throw a rock into a pond, and that ripple is going to continue for a long time. Even though the pandemic is coming to a close in a lot of people's minds, I think we're going to continue to feel the repercussions for a long time. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here about that. But not only is the rental assistance important right now as we come out of that, but in addition, the tenant advocacy and education is going to be a vital piece moving forward. And that is always going to be important. There's not, I would say that things that are available to folks right now as far as that are not super accessible right now. So I think moving forward with rental assistance where people need it, and also the tenant advocacy and education pieces are going to be super vital moving forward. Yeah, that's about it though. I don't know if anybody has any questions about the collaborative, and I think Rebecca Daner and I could pose that too, or field any of those.
Could one of you talk briefly about the engagement with landlords and what you've learned since March of last year, and the crucial role that landlords play and those interventions that HSC is making with that group?
I'd be happy to start off on that, because that was a big obstacle prior to the COVID pandemic hitting us. It was always finding a landlord willing to take a chance on the families that Family Promise serves. So we were always pushing that envelope and having very little success. With the CARES money from that the county helped us get, that was a game changer, because we developed a deeper partnership with landlords. It was a bit of an uphill education. we got Hugh Carter from the Chamber of Commerce as part of the collaborative, and he became an immediate game changer. So when a landlord was a little uncomfortable and perhaps didn't want to necessarily play in the sandbox on this, Hugh would place a call and talk about it as being economic development for the landlords, and really smooth the way to the point where some of our more difficult ones in May and June now were referring their own clients to the HSC. So I know from a family promise perspective, we've been doing a little of this work for a number of years for prevention, because it costs per child around $500 to keep them housed versus all the money that goes into once they're homeless. So that's a big economic change and benefit for our county. But just the number of 1099s we'd file each year for landlords for rent was very limited. And last year we filed 160 new ones that we hadn't done before. So that tells how many landlords we were now engaging, whereas before it was a half a dozen maybe each year.
And I just want to add, I think that landlord discussion will continue. I know the Housing Authority also has a position for a landlord liaison position that is now starting, that we imagine will work with Gabby as well. And again, try to kind of collaborate those services and continue to do some education with landlords about Section 8 acceptance, about the benefits of, helping us house our community, and building those relationships where if they know that there's someone to call or mitigate risks by having those relationships, that opens a door with landlords. And I think we really, in a short amount of time, of course, initially I was like, well, why wouldn't they take money? But there was just a hesitancy to do that, honestly. And I think we had them in a spot with eviction moratoriums, let's be honest, that, force that. But now that we've built that relationship, I think it will just get easier. So it reminds me, again, it's all about relationship. And so this kind of collaboration, I guess I want to just underscore the need to support this kind of work where we continue to talk to the landlords and build those relationships, because we don't have enough Danas and tenants to homeowners and Gabbies to house everyone that needs supportive service housing. And we need to find a way to collaborate with landlords to provide, quality, affordable housing as well. So that effort, having the staff capacity to do this is another brilliant part of HSC.
One more thing I want to tease out of the HSC topic before we move on to Eudora Resource Center is, and then we do some questions, is talk about the role of case management and the funding that has been built into HSC and why that's so crucial, and the creative way that you have integrated it into this work.
I can speak to that a little bit. Like I was saying, as a part of the HSC, part of that is doing the care coordination and the supportive services and coming under one roof as far as an understanding of what that looks like. And as part of the HSC funds that we have available to us right now, we're extending $250 to an agency if they decide to take on the case management for a person. And that can look different depending on the participant in the program. However, I think that will go a long ways. As we know, Douglas County area does not have a lot of funding available for case management, but we're hoping that through at least a little bit of incentive, people will be able to take that on more and more so. I don't know if Dana or Rebecca have anything to add to that.
Thank you, Gabby. Well, I do want to spend just a teensy bit of time on talking about the Eudora Resource Center, because I do think it is related to what we're talking about here: resource navigation and coordinating access to resources from a countywide perspective. And I want to let Daniel Smith with the United Way of Douglas County kind of tee things up about the role of the United Way in this project. And then I have Mary Kirkendall is here in my office with me, and I'm gonna walk across my office and let her use my laptop for a little bit and let her talk about the Eudora Resource Center.
Great, thank you, Jill. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay, yeah, I'm seeing that. Hey, my name is Daniel B. Smith. I'm with the United Way of Douglas County, and I'm here maybe kind of acting as a segue a little bit, because I do want to say that I'm very much in support of the Housing Stabilization Collaborative, which was just discussed. But for me, it's really important to voice support not just for the initiatives themselves, but also for the approach and the individuals that we have who are leading these. So for us, the Eudora Resource Center really is important on 3 different levels. I'm going to try and speak briefly so that Mary, who has the more substantive information, can have some time. And I also realize we're kind of near the end of the meeting. But for us, and for me personally, at the United Way of Douglas County, we always try and keep the entirety of Douglas County in mind, everything we do. We all live here in Lawrence, all of our staff members, and our offices are here in Lawrence, but we always try and keep a countywide perspective. But the reality for us, and this has been really apparent in establishing the United Way Eudora Resource Center, is that people outside of Lawrence don't necessarily always see it that way. This doesn't happen often, but occasionally I'll be speaking to somebody outside of Lawrence and they will refer to us as the United Way of Lawrence. And to be honest, that actually kind of hurts. So this is, one of many things that we want to do to try and remedy that. And so that is part of it just for us personally as an organization, trying to live up to our name essentially. Another part of that is just the reality that we don't feel like the communities outside of Lawrence in Douglas County really have the same level of access to services. I'm sure that all of you are relatively aware of that, so I'm not going to go into too great of length, but for us, the reality that individuals living in Eudora are going to have access to transportation or and maybe travel to Lawrence or reach out to an agency in Lawrence that doesn't necessarily understand the specificity of their situation. To us, that's not really an adequate arrangement, and we would like to see that develop and change. But going back to the Housing Stabilization Collaborative and bringing Gabby into this a little bit, and then also kind of shifting the attention to Mary, for us, it's the success of these programs is really about these individuals who are executing these things on a day-to-day basis and the importance that they bring to the organization. And for us, we're interested in seeing the county fund the United Way Eudora Resource Center, and that funding is important. But I honestly don't know if we had that funding for that position. I don't know if it would work if we didn't have the right person for that position. And for us, having Mary Kirkendall as an AmeriCorps with us, leading this project and launching it has been super, super crucial. She has so many connections in the community. She really understands Eudora, and that has made all the difference. And the one thing that I will say before sort of letting her speak a little bit, and I will say that one of the reasons why I am speaking so much here is that since she is serving as an AmeriCorps, technically she shouldn't necessarily be advocating for funding. So I will remind her of that. But a lot of the conversations that I've been having recently following the launch, the ribbon cutting for the center in Eudora have actually been with people in Baldwin. I've had friends of mine who work at the city of Baldwin and people at the Baldwin Library reaching out to me about all of this, because when they're seeing us launch this center in Eudora, they all want to know how we can do this in Baldwin. And all of those conversations inevitably get to the same question, which is how do we find a Mary for Baldwin? Because Mary really is she's the key ingredient. She's the most important part of the whole process. And so the response in Eudora has been really great. I feel like in some of the conversations I've had with people there, it can be a little bit disheartening. Sometimes it seems like they almost expect to be forgotten as a baseline. But we're hoping that if we continue to invest in this resource center, making sure that resources are equitably accessible for people in that community, that maybe that impression will start to change. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think maybe it would be better just to have Mary speak a little bit about her personal experience there, and she can answer some questions as well.
Thank you, Daniel. And hello, everyone. Thank you for letting me be here. I awkwardly showed up in the courthouse. I was the only person there. I don't think Sarah saw me for a while. So Jill kindly scooted me over to her office. So here I am. And in her email, when she asked about what we could speak about, she gave us kind of 3 topics. And I wrote it out. I'm just going to follow my script so I don't talk too long. She asked us to talk about our role. So my role, why it's important, and what we need to be successful in the future. So starting with my role as the Eudora Community Navigator, which started in October as an AmeriCorps position. The main purpose was to assess the needs of the Eudora community and act as a point of contact for resource navigation, to help facilitate projects like the Eudora Pet Food Drive in collaboration with the Lawrence Humane Society, the Eudora Diaper Drive in collaboration with the Eudora Food Pantry, building capacity for the Eudora Giving Garden, the community garden, and establishing a Eudora Coalition, which is a group of about 20 stakeholders in the community. I work to build connections and capacity for what is now the United Way Eudora Resource Center. Feels like a huge win. And that was officially opened on April 1st through a grant from the Douglas County Community Foundation. And then I'm working to build connections with Douglas County agencies such as Burt Nash and Just Food to help facilitate their presence and or implement their presence in Eudora. And the next piece, why it is important. It is important because there's a lack or really no resources in Eudora, and people just kind of have grown to expect that now, and I think that needs to change. There are mental and transportation-based barriers for some Eudora residents to utilize the services in Lawrence. There is a communication barrier that can be met by having a community navigator promote the resources that are in Eudora and Douglas County. And I feel like the community navigator acts like a connector Lego piece that builds strong and sustainable links between community members and organizations. And the last piece, what we need to be successful in the future. So we will definitely need an established space for resource navigation, support groups, and for Douglas County agencies to offer services in Eudora. We need a salaried position for the community navigator. We need support and guidance from organizations like United Way, for example, in grant writing and data collection. And we also need support from partners in Eudora, which I'm hopeful that the Eudora Coalition will enable via communication, teamwork, and a unified effort to serve our community. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Commissioners, at this point, I want to open it up for any questions that you may have regarding HSC or Eudora Resource Center, and see where that leads us.
This is Commissioner Portillo. Thank you, Jill. And thank you, everyone, for this presentation. I do really appreciate hearing and learning more about HSC and more about the Eudora Resource Center. My question really has to do with HSC. So we know that there is huge racial inequity when it comes to housing. A lot of this is historical because of redlining. A lot of it is current systemic racism. How, in your efforts, do you kind of think through these racial justice issues as a part of your housing justice work?
Shannon, thank you for that question. I can jump in for a second. And I know Dana and I, as organizations, have been looking at that, and we actually did ask, get racial data on the HSC people that we served through COVID. And I hate this data, because in one place, when you're serving people that are disproportionately identified as BIPOC, we know that's exactly the history you've just referred to, right? That they're disproportionately impoverished for all of the reasons that you listed, and so housing can be a bigger issue. But until we change that, to me, our focus has to be on making sure that there's adequate access to these kind of programs, and that we are talking about why is there racial disparities? Why are more people using our programs? Dana, do you want to mention what, I mean, Family Promise serves families that are homeless, and you know, your BIPOC percentages are like 45-50%, which
Yeah,
is unfortunate. It is a horrible ratio, but it also is suggesting that we are getting to those, helping those people that need it most as well. So I feel like that access is working, and that we have to constantly put that in front of our policies and continue to look at our access policies and make sure that outreach and the ways in which we market HSC, the ways in which people know that are very aware of those barriers for people that are marginalized. But I think those of us that, again, this collaboration addresses that in some aspects, because most of the agencies that work in the housing field are serving a higher proportion of people of color. And in that case, I think we can continue to support that work so that we can make things more equitable.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question very much. And as Rebecca said, a horrifying disproportion of folks that we serve at Family Promise year in, year out, since we've been collecting this data, is our BIPOC population. And so those are people that have fallen in deep in the crisis of homelessness. And so to me, spending much more of our effort as an agency, as a community, in things such as the HSC, where we're preventing that and then marketing that and making it available for targeting communities that are on the margins, is so critical. And not allowing, just because of not knowing, not educating, not allowing that fall to be further into a crisis of homelessness. I think it's critical. And just to speak on housing too, for families, the pandemic showed us so many things that were wrong, right? And so many things that are broken in our systems. And housing became clearly healthcare too. And it also became school for the kiddos. And so when we're talking about this subject, and we've got to be proactive and target the areas of folks that struggle anyway with things like access to Wi-Fi. And I know Gabby's helping, and we're helping people side by side applying for various programs that they'd be eligible for. If CARA, great. If not CARA, the HSC funding that is much more flexible and can turn on a dime. So going to places where people are and helping them through those obstacles. So let's not let an obstacle be the reason folks aren't staying housed.
I did think of something I want to ask Mary real quick to talk about the partnership with the Eudora Library. Carol Wolford was, I think she was here at one point. She may have had to drop off, but I think that's an important part of the Eudora Resource Center and the model in the future. I want to let Mary talk about that.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I just assumed Carol would talk about this. So my AmeriCorps position, the host site is the Eudora Community Library, and they have agreed that if this goes through and the new library is built, that they will build in a resource center in the library. So it will be officed at no cost to anyone, to have a sustainable position there, and they really want to have the resources accessed in the library. So this is fully supported by the library board.
Any other questions from commissioners that we can answer?
This is Commissioner Portillo. I just have one other question. Well, first, before that, I love the partnership with the library. I think libraries are crucial to us getting information out. So I really love hearing about that in Eudora. My last question just has to do with Governor Kelly announced a housing assessment study for the entire state of Kansas in late 2020. Is the housing group, is Douglas County or Housing Coalition in any way kind of partnering with that? Had conversations with that? How is that going to affect what we're doing here locally?
I don't have that. I know that I received an invitation to be part of one of the listening sessions that I think it's Friday. There was a Douglas County one for local government. I think that's the part of the study. But that's all I'm familiar with, Commissioner Portillo. I know I shared with each of the commissioners earlier today that we have a really significant opportunity to have a dialogue with the state of Kansas around expanding housing opportunities and with utilizing some of the federal funding that's going to become available at a state, city and county level in partnership with KDADS, which folks around this table will be engaged in as well. So I do know that those are the two ways that we're trying to engage in every opportunity that I can think of to make sure that I'm inserting HSC into it or Eudora Navigation Center. I'm doing that. And one example, particularly on HSC, that I wanted to mention is we had a meeting with the Judge McCabery and Donovan last year to make sure that they were aware of the HSC. And then we're doing an update meeting with Judge McCabery, Judge Klepper, and Judge Donovan next week, along with Shannon Oury is going to join that as well to talk about that landlord liaison position that's going to be coming online, just to make sure once again that they know that these resources are available. So when they're working their way through those eviction dockets, they can use their discretion, which is largely it's discretion to pause and say, have you considered this program? Have you reached out? They really welcome that information initially. And so we just want to make sure that we're getting them the most relevant information, timely information, and maybe talking about some of the more challenging aspects of relationships with landlords, which I know continue to gum up the system, so to speak.
Thank you. Those were all of my questions.
This is Commissioner Reed here. I don't think I have any questions. You all gave a really thorough, great overview. And I just want to take the opportunity while you're all here to say thank you for the work that's been done in the past year, especially. And, you know, I'll put my service provider hat on for a moment and tell you how grateful I am for all the clients of mine that you helped keep housed in the past year. And I mean, it's just a game changer for so many people. And I'm really excited about the possibility of that collaborative model going forward. And I think that's what I really love about it most, is that it really was a convening of agencies that sometimes have some narrow scopes of the work that we do, and a ton of overlapping practice and praxis and support models. And so are just really grateful to you all for that. I know it was no small feat, and I thank you for giving us a good overview. And then I just want to say, especially Gabby, I haven't met you in person yet, but thank you for everything that you've been doing and have accomplished already in such a short amount of time. Like having somebody to do tenant advocacy and landlord liaison, it's a total game changer in this community. It is just a huge gap of resources that has not existed before. And I'm really excited that we're going to see more positions that are similar to that, and that like we have some forward momentum when it comes to talking to landlords in this community. And that's been a battle that advocates and social workers and case managers have been battling, as Dana and Rebecca really spoke to, for a long time, and it's hard to make inroads. And so for the opportunity that this past year has presented for that, I'm really grateful. And thanks for all the work you're doing on that. And I will also note that I think it's also important to acknowledge that, like, having somebody like you, Gabby, who that's really your role and your title, it creates some good continuity and also some protections for privacy, I think, for community members to have somebody that's not a domestic violence advocate necessarily, or other agencies that just by the nature of the agency tells you what a family is going through, and there are privacy concerns around that for some folks. So I just super grateful for that. And then Mary, I know you're not, I hope you're still there and you can hear me. I am grateful to know you now, and really enjoyed meeting you and Eudora and hearing about all of the ideas that you have, and to hear that that's progressing, and super excited to know that the library is on board and wants to make a commitment to that being a permanent situation. And I'm grateful for you. And I think Daniel must be right that you are really a key ingredient to that whole situation, and being able to make those connections and make some momentum in, again, under a year in a short amount of time. So just Gabby and Mary, I'm super impressed with you and super grateful for all the work that you're doing. And Daniel, I also wanted to note that it is not a new notion for community members that Douglas County or that United Way is Lawrence focused. Like when I was an AmeriCorps member and then a staff member there, it was something we had best intentions and efforts behind, and also missed the mark still, in making sure that we were filling those gaps and making sure that people had access to services that really are meant for all Douglas County residents, but is not necessarily known or not accessible enough. So it's been a long-standing dynamic, I think, and I'm just really grateful that there's people who are being intentional about doing something about it now. So thank you all for your time tonight and the work you're doing.
This Commissioner Kelly and Rebecca and Dana, it's so great to see. You know how much I just so appreciate the work that you do, and Mary, you as well, and Gabby and Daniel. It's great to meet you tonight. I will tell you what really inspires me is listening to the story of how we continued to collaborate. We said, hey, we don't have enough partners. How can we collaborate? We don't have enough partners. How can we collaborate? What you explained about Hugh and, bringing the chamber on and thinking it from an economic development standpoint, you have been so creative. You have worked on many different angles to find upstream solutions to this problem. And housing is just such a critical issue, and it gets so many of our families, so many of our community members in trouble, and in a lot of different ways. And so dealing with that first, understanding how important that is. And I'm just so grateful for the work you're doing, working together, working collaboratively, and extending into, communities that have services, but maybe are not accessing services. And I'm really interested to talk more about transportation as a barrier to services in Eudora and Baldwin. And we've got a lot of work to do. I do have a question. I was super grateful that we were able to put a lot of energy in the tank when it came to housing, when it came to the CARES Act. I mean, that was just, boy, that was huge. And we needed it before the CARES Act, I will say that, but we really needed it come CARES Act. And we may have funding with ARPA coming down the pike that can really put some more energy in that tank. And I encourage you to think of sustainable ways that we can do, because it won't last forever, right? It's going to be a big shot in the arm, but it won't last forever. But one of the things that we learned from the CARES Act was about utility assistance. If you remember our conversations, we talked like utility assistance has gone like that. Remember that? And it's like, oh, we need all this money for utility assistance. And we put money with the city of Lawrence, and we put money with the city of Eudora, and then we turned around and they were sending it back to us. And I'm interested just to hear from you all who are working on the front lines, what did you learn about utility assistance? Is there a better way that because we know that that's a real issue. We know that that's a crisis and leads to homelessness and to housing crisis. What illuminate us on what you've learned about that?
From my perspective, there's just too many avenues to which people have to go to, and it gets confusing and convoluted. I know that with the City of Lawrence dollars, it was like I was a part of this too, but several organizations that were supposed to like funnel people and do the application and then go to City of Lawrence. But I wonder how many people were, I mean, all the funding was dispersed, which is great to hear, but I wonder how many people were lost in just the phone calls and all of that stuff at the same time. So I think if there were any utility funding to come in the future, it would be good to get it under one umbrella and have one sort of process for people to do, and something that's not just like a phone call. Like there should be like an online application in which it would make it easier to process more quickly. But that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would concur with Gabby. What we found is that as a provider, we had to help households with a lot of uphill energy to apply for the relief. It was so cumbersome that, and then we bore the cost of that because we were taking time away from our social work case managers and individual service to jump through hoops. So it was incredibly complicated, and you needed to have that help to provide for providers. And I don't believe that it was well targeted. And this goes back to Commissioner Portillo's point about the how do we reach those who most need it. We got so many calls for water assistance after the CARES money was gone. And to put it in the bill and mail it out, and I don't mean to speak ill of anybody. It was just a good learning experience. We need to go to put it in the bags at the Just Foods donation. You know, we need to go to the places where people are and make that and help them navigate through it. The importance of this navigator role, not leave the onus on them when they're already so stressed out, just worrying about, I hope my lights don't get turned off today. So there's a lot of lessons that were learned on that, not just fully burdening the social service and human service agencies to take on this gap, because then something has to give there. We ended up utilizing a lot of volunteers that came in to help people apply for those assistance. But boy, was it cumbersome.
This is Commissioner Portillo. I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that for so much of the CARES Act funding and social service funding in general, we don't necessarily think about the administrative burden that we're putting on individuals and households. I think we're getting better at understanding that from kind of a service perspective, what we're expecting people to do in order to access support and the administrative burden there. But I think we're still really overlooking the administrative burden around organizations, agencies, and collaborations. It takes time for you all to come together as a collaborative group, and it takes administrative agency to kind of organize that. And then when we're also asking, when we have these emergency funds and things like that come up, for you all to kind of pivot and shift and focus on these, it does create a real burden on organizations. And I think it's really important for us to think about that as we receive ARPA funds, as we're thinking about next steps. How do we make sure that we're accounting for the administrative burden for individuals in our community, as well as for the agencies and organizations that we're relying on to distribute these funds?
Thank you.
And I'm just curious, I'm really excited about the KDAD's information that we found about. Jill sent us some information on that today. And I'm wondering how we engage, and I know the city of Lawrence is on there and the city of Eudora, but how we engage those utility providers, you know, to understand. I visited recently a program in Kansas City, and I shared the information with Jill so she can fill you in, that partners with those utility providers and says, let's walk you through it. And you're as much in this housing, because they really don't want to go back and forth, turning their water on, turning their water off, chasing down those bills. They don't want to do that either. Is there a way we can add them to this collective so that they are as invested in this as the rest of ours? Because I think what you said, Dana, was exactly what I heard, right? It was too cumbersome. It was too hard. And Gabby, I think you're right. There was too many places you had to go. And I think the point of what you're all trying to do is to reduce that, is to make it, I hate to say one-stop shop because everybody wants a one-stop shop for everything, right? But I do think we've got to find a way to make it easier for families that are so taxed to begin with. And life is just hard. And then to ask them to go all over town to access services and fill out forms and we've got to make it easier. But I do think those utility companies can be part of that solution. So I'm sure you've reached out to, I'm sure you're already working with them, and I'm telling you this already, but it was just when I was visiting this program, I thought, boy, we got to think about that. And I know you probably are.
This is Commissioner Reed here. I really appreciate that question and those points, Commissioner Kelly. And I think I'll just add that I think another layer of it is most of those assistance programs, that temporary kind of built out of nowhere program for the city to use CARES Act money for assistance that they've never had before. So it was truly a brand new, they didn't have any framework for that. So there's that. But I think we have a tendency to always require that a social worker, a case manager, an advocate, that somebody based in a social service agency is who facilitates that application. So the City of Lawrence Utility Assistance was a perfect example of that. There is a select few agencies. And so for all the people who are already getting services to those agencies, they're being told about it and supported through the process. And for everybody else, it goes back to the question of where are they getting that information? How do they want to access or feel the need to go through the process of getting a case manager or a social worker to help them versus just being able to access it on their own. And so, I think that we just have a tendency towards gatekeeping in those processes sometimes and not allowing people to self-determine their ability to fill out an application, and then make it so that the resources are available to support people who want some more support or who don't have Wi-Fi access or right. And so I think that there's a need for appreciating direct access and self-referral and self-determination on top of making it a more centralized and streamlined, straightforward process that doesn't require 10 extra pieces of documentation to prove that your answers are what you say they are. I just think that there's a kind of a multitude of layers that play into that. But I appreciate you bringing that up, and I think it's something that we need to keep thinking through, at least with the different cities and their utilities that they provide. Black Hills and Evergy are kind of their own bucket of chaos and weird navigation.
Commissioner Reed, I really appreciate that, because when I was thinking about that, a vast majority, Dana, we probably paid maybe 10% had caseworkers with HSC. The rest filled out the application online for themselves. So that really is, to your point, making sure you have that application, and then saying anyone else who needs supports to fill that out has access to that. And they used those, particularly Centro Hispano, where there were some language barriers and we didn't have the application in Spanish. And again, now that it's not such a short timed thing, I think we can make sure we have some of those pieces online as well. But to your point, we really found that was efficient, that it didn't have to go through a case manager. And so I think we'll use that moving forward, as well as collaborating with the chamber and with the utility companies, Patrick, that's something we've thought of, but haven't reached out yet. And so, yeah, as a collaborative voice, I think we have a lot more power to bring those partners on as well than when there was a little bit of money for utility assistance going to 10 different agencies and there was a lot of wasted energy. So again, this I know we never want to be so big that we're not, in the trenches meeting people where they're at. But I think the HSC from our experience with COVID was that we did make it very simple. We didn't require case managers, but they were there if needed, and we paid them if needed. And so using those lessons learned moving forward, I think will help us in answering a lot of these great questions that you guys have brought up.
Another point about collaborating on the utilities in some way, shape, or form is I just have stories that pop up in my mind where somebody, in telling their story, they reported a leaky toilet to their landlord, and they said they'd done this for 6 months, and now they have a $12,000 water bill, sewage bill. Things like that, or I don't have any bills in my name, only to find out their aunt or their grandma turned their water on in their name and they have a $1,200 water bill. And so things like that, if we could collect those stories and address some of those things as a collaborative rather than little agencies one-off going after that, maybe we could really make some change in the systems as well, but at least bring light to them.
This is Commissioner Portillo. If there aren't additional questions from commissioners, we'll open this up to public comment. Sarah, do we have anyone in the courthouse for public comment?
No.
Jill, are you seeing anybody online?
I'm not seeing anyone.
Well, I do just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for coming and presenting to us this evening. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Mary, for coming out to the courthouse and keeping Jill company. We really appreciate that as well.
Commissioners, thank you again for this opportunity, and I'm glad that the ARPA funds have been discussed already, because I do think, if these were meaningful projects to support with our CARES Act money, I do think that we'd be hard pressed not to consider these as we look at those ARPA funds in the future. You will see these projects come before you as part of the 2022 budget as well. But because these programs are on the ground today and they've been serving people for the last year, I thought it was important to just highlight the work that they've done and just make sure it's top of mind, particularly as folks continue to struggle with issues of housing and resource navigation.
Thank you. We will move on to appointments. Sarah, do we have any appointments to discuss this evening?
Commissioners, I don't know of any for firm.
I have not closed my communication loop with Kim yet. So yeah, I'm sorry. We have had some contact. She was out of town also, so I need to follow back up with her. And I have out of town also, so.
Sorry about that. I have sent the commissioners just some very preliminary conversations about planning commission, and I'll follow up with you next week. And so hopefully we can, if we need to talk about it, we can talk about it then.
That sounds good to me. So we will move to miscellaneous. Sarah, what do you have for us?
Well, commissioners, I do not have a memo this week. It is both a as a result of, I've started budget negotiation, or not negotiations, but budget hearings with outside community partner agencies. So my calendar's gotten quite full with that, but honestly, we didn't have anything new to report to add to the memo this week. Next week, we do have a work session on the Crisis and Recovery Center, and the funding model for it is our work session for next week, but I didn't have anything new to add to it. And I stand for any questions commissioners might have.
No questions for me and no miscellaneous items either.
Commissioner Kelly, no miscellaneous item. Oh, well, I mean, we did meet, MPO met last week. It was a very short meeting, but we went over projects and things like that. I do think there's some opportunities with regional transportation, and I have long, well, long is relative now. After COVID, everything seems long, but you know, I think we have a lot of possibilities when it comes to regional transportation. I know that the city is looking at, you know, where their new bus hub is and thinking about some new strategies about social service support when it comes to transportation. Their new transportation director, I think, has some really, our transit director has some really interesting and innovative ideas that we haven't thought of here before that may help some of our more vulnerable populations get to the services that they need.
This is Commissioner Portillo. I also don't have any questions. I was going to report out to all of you about the CJCC meeting, but you got to see the highlights here and have another discussion with Sheriff Armbruster and Dr. Craven. So again, I'm just really excited about that information getting out in the world. So,
Commissioner Portillo, if I can say, I've been watching those meetings and I'm really encouraged by the dialogue that's happening at them. That has not always been consistent. And I think we've said to the, you know, into different groups at different times, how much we appreciate that. But I just want to, your leadership on there is appreciated. And I think we're really, I really like some of the things that was talked about when they were looking at those data dashboards. I really think we're making progress there. I appreciate our sheriff's work on being willing to be transparent about that data. And you know, in some ways right now, some of that data looks better, right, than it's been in the past. But there may be times when it doesn't look as good. And I think that will be our real challenge. So I appreciate what the CJC is doing and all the work that you're doing there and all the members are doing. So thank you.
thank you. This is Commissioner Portillo. I do just want to say, I think a huge shout out goes to our community members, because we have very active community members that move the dialogue forward in those meetings, and they are volunteering their time and asking the important critical questions. And I'm deeply appreciative of them.
That did remind me of one thing that I should have put on my memo, which is that there is we have a community listening session scheduled for next week for the CJCC related to mobile access and mobile crisis. And you know, that really did come out of conversations that the CJCC had about how it sees itself and its role in the community. I believe it is scheduled for the 26th. The information is on,
27th.
27th, and the information is on the CJCC hub. And this is not going to be your normal, like, everybody get up and do their dog and pony show and leave 2 minutes for questions. This is going to be led by listening, and it's going to be facilitated to try to encourage dialogue and conversation with our community about what their experience has been with crisis in the community. So anybody planning to come, we want the community to talk to us, as opposed to the various stakeholders and partners that are working on this project. We're early enough on in this process that this would be really key, valuable feedback. So I should have mentioned that, and I know it's on the hub, and hopefully commissioners can help us get the word out about that important event next week.
Thank you, Sarah. And we do have great social media posts that Carrie put together about that, a really accessible flyer. Big shout out to Carrie. They all look great. The listening session will be Tuesday, the 27th at 6. I'm excited because this, as Sarah mentioned, it really did come out of conversations from community members saying that they want an update about what's been happening in the CJCC, particularly some of those work groups. So it'll be a chance for a really short update from the CJCC, but mostly listening, because I think that mobile crisis is something that we really need to move forward in our community. So I'm excited about that listening session. And this is kind of our pilot listening session. So we're hoping that we get some really great feedback from the community, and then we can kind of roll through some of our other topics on the CJCC. If this format doesn't work out, we'll try something different, but the goal is to have more dialogue with the community beyond just our CJCC meetings, which are in the middle of the day. So an opportunity for the public to participate at other times. I thought that that was also sparking that we had our first indigent defense work group last week as well. And that went really well. Mike Bauer put together a really great kind of outline of questions. And I think as all good questions do, it led to more questions. So we're kind of really thinking through what are the important pieces for us to consider in that space. We had a really great presentation from Sharon Brett, who's a board member for Kansas Holistic Defenders, just kind of around how holistic defense can help us address some of the upstream issues and really cut down on recidivism. So I think that that'll be an important space for continued dialogue around indigent defense in our community.
As Commissioner Kelly, Sarah, do you want to sort of plug the stress during COVID BIPOC? Isn't that tomorrow night?
I believe so. And if Carrie Britt knows more than I do, she's sometimes more in the loop on some of those things related to the PIO group for Unified Command, but I do believe that is tomorrow.
I have it on my calendar for tomorrow night at 7. So I just want to make sure that people know I can read the information, or you can go to the Douglas County Coronavirus Response website hub and see it there. But I know that that's coming up as well. So I would encourage people to attend. I really appreciate the work of our equity advisors who have really done an amazing job of focusing on our equity, and we have a lot of work to do there. That reminds me of one more thing. This Wednesday at 1 o'clock is our final mass vaccination clinic, and I was planning on going and just saying thank you to all the volunteers there. I'd love to invite the other commissioners to join me there, just as a thank you to all those. I know Commissioner Reed, you did some volunteering. Commissioner Pertune, you might have as well. But I think it would be great as we close down the mass vaccination clinic. It was really great work by emergency management, Lawrence Douglas County, but so many partners. I know if I go through them, I will miss some. So many people did such great work, and I want to thank the volunteers on that last clinic. I think that's important. So that's 1 o'clock next Wednesday. Maybe we should adjourn. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we don't have any, I was just putting that in my calendar before I forgot. So sorry for that multitasking there. It's going to be hard when we come back in real life and we can't throw things on our calendar in that exact second. But if we have nothing else for miscellaneous, I would say that if we don't have anything else for miscellaneous, then let's go ahead and move forward and adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you.